Hello folks and welcome back to the channel. Now, firstly, I've got to say a massive thank you for those that have supported the channel over the last few months. Really appreciated. And you know what, if you're not a subscriber, please think about it. Just hit the button below and you'll see loads of different styles of fishing, big reservoirs, rivers, commercial fisheries like the one we're on today. Now, today's session, it's all about shallow fishing. We're at one of my favourite, it's one of my local venues as well. This is Shearsby Valley Lakes. Now, this place has really matured over the last couple of years. You can see reeds everywhere, trees everywhere, and the fishing is fantastic. Now, I used to visit this venue, I'm saying probably like 10 years ago, and it was a totally different venue back then, but we would catch loads of fish, especially on the evening matches, using casters shallow. And that's the method that I want to talk to you about today. I can remember the glory days, you know, when I would fish a day match at Lakeview on the other side of the town, then get in the van, drive over to here, try and fish an evening match in the same day. I'd have a gallon of casters with me and I'd make those casters last for, you know, those two matches. So I've just got back from a festival down at Tamar where I had a fantastic week's fishing and I've got a load of casters left over. Beautiful casters, Willy Worms casters. They seem to sort of last forever, these Willy Worms casters do. And a quick wash off in the water. And I'm left with like 6 pints of casters. And it's a shame to throw them away. So I thought I'd bring them along to Shearsby and show you guys how I go about catching like F1s and carp shallow. That's the bait, simplest of baits. Like I say, 6 pints of casters, give them a good wash off. I've got no other bait on my side tray. You know, when I'm feeding casters for F1s and carp and we're fishing those ultra short rigs, I like to just use casters as a hook bait. So I know some people like to use a little pellet maybe, or worm head or maggot, something like that. I think matching the hatch and fishing on the hook what you're feeding is the way to go. What I want to do is talk about rigs, because this is where a lot of people do get confused with their sort of like F1 stroke carp shallow fishing. It's just, we have been fishing for a little bit and I'm wary that the fish might drift off, so I'm just flicking a few casts in while I talk to you guys. So first up, I want to talk about like my deepest style rig, the rig that I would use maybe starting a session, or when I'm trying to hold a rig still and just waiting for odd bites, and that is like my bulk rig. All these rigs feature 4-inch hook lengths, and this rig is a 4x10s float. We're not using heavy floats today, but we've got all the bulk directly above that 4-inch hook length. The aim of the game with this rig is to keep everything really still, keep our pole tip still, and because we've got like a 2-inch lash above the float, so 2 inches of line above the float. Basically, when we get a bite on that float, it's going to pull our elastic out. I've got that float dotted down, so literally it's just holding the surface film. You're not allowed overshotted floats here. You're not allowed no float rigs, you know, so this is the best we're going to get for this scenario. So this rig is all about keeping that line tight from hook bait to elastic as much as possible and creating that direct rig. And like I say, this is the rig that we're using for holding our pole still and sort of reading off bites as well. Are we getting some line bites? We're missing a few bites. Do we need to fish a shallower rig? This rig's going to tell us that. So 0.14 main line, 0.12 hook length. A lot of people, when we talk about shallow fishing in the middle of summer, they get a little bit overexcited with lines and things like that. And I think 0.12, now even if we're catching reasonable sized carp, 0.12 where F1s are involved on these smaller style lakes is the way to go. Got a size 16 hook, and that's going to be the same lines and hooks throughout all of my rigs. I've got a yellow reactor core on this rig just because we're fishing slightly deeper, so we want to make sure that obviously when we net a fish it comes up within netting range, so yellow reactor core. Now my main rig, my main shallow rig, and this is the sort of rig that I've used for years and I love this style of rig. It means that I can be really active, slapping the bait in all the time. Little tiny carbon stemmed float. I think this takes 3 number 8s or 4 number 8 styles, so really short stubby carbon stem float, nice thin bristle. Again, it's all about creating as little resistance on the fish as possible, so nice thin bristle. Again, we've got that really short line between pole tip and float, around 2 inches. All about helping the fish hook themselves against that elastic. And then we've got, above our 4-inch hook length, we've got 2 number 12s, just to really straighten the rig out as we're letting the rig slap on the water. We're trying to straighten the rig out. And then below the float, we've got 3 number 12s. It's just what this float takes. So obviously we've had to put probably 1 extra number 12 on that I'd want to, just to get it dotted right down. But we've got little bulk under the float, and then to straighten everything out as the bait falls, we've got 2 number 12s there. Again, 4-inch hook length, and this is our slapping rig. Once we find the depth that the fish are feeding at, and you know, in a match situation, I'd probably have another rig set up slightly deeper than this as well. This is set at 10, 11 inches deep, which is the depth that we've been catching quite a few fish at today. I'd probably set one up at maybe 12 or 14 inches as well in a match situation, but for the purpose of today, this has been perfect. And this rig, like I say, is the rig that we're going to be working. I'll show you in a minute when we get going. The rig that we're constantly turning over, slapping it on the water, trying to keep a tight line. We're being really active with this rig because we've got a bit of shot down the line and we've got a bit of shot underneath the float, a bit of weight there. We can keep that tight line, try and get the rig to fall nice and slowly through the water. That is our main rig. Now, this is a rig that I think quite a few of you would be interested in, because we talk about jiggers all the time, and jiggers are fantastic, you know, and I've had loads of success with a jigger, but we're catching really shallow today. Like I say, 10-inch deep, a lot of the fish that we're catching. And I'm really keen to just show you how small a jigger you can get. So this is just a little polyball jigger. We've got 4 number 10s, and it's 3 number 10s and a number 12 above the 4-inch hook length. We've got 0.22 line on the jigger. Again, a jigger float, it's all about keeping that stiffness, and that stiffer line helps keep the rig more direct. And this is just a little polyball jigger. It's got a little tube running through a polyball. Makes that nice little plop on the water rather than that big spladoosh, which I think when you're fishing 10 inches deep is perfect. So this is a rig that I'd use on, you know, them smaller snake lakes, or again like today where you're catching 10-inch deep. Now if we were going somewhere big open water catching F1s, I think this is just going to get blown all over the place and it's a waste of time. But I think for these little smaller waters where the fish have seen it a little bit before and you have to use a little tiny bit of finesse to catch them, I think a little jigger can sometimes be the way to go. So there's our 3 basic rigs. I think obviously, like we say in a match, we'd probably have different depths covered, and we'd probably set up a slightly beefier jigger as well for fishing slightly deeper. But that's our 3 rigs covered. I want to catch a few more fish. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch the cameras round, and we'll have like a live 10 or 15 minute session of me going in, working my rigs, showing you different feeding patterns, you know, just going through the motions really, because like I say, I've got these casters left over. I was itching to get out and come here and find a nice day and get out on the bank and do this. So I think it's definitely worth bringing the cameras along and just showing you guys how I go about it as well. Right then, ladies and gents, I'm ready to go. Like I say, we've been fishing for probably, I don't know, half an hour, and we've had a few fish, and then we had a little break to talk to you about the rigs. So as with all shallow fishing methods, we need to keep the bait going in all the time, so I need to keep feeding all the time. I want to talk to you just briefly about hook baits, because I know a lot of people, they like banding their baits and all that sort of jazz, but I've always found just hooking a bait really simple. I like to keep things as simple as possible, as you know, and hooking a bait is the way to go. I also feel that when you look in your casters, you've got all different shades of caster. And when I'm shallow fishing, these sort of rubbery, lighter casters, they're quite often the one to go for, because 1, they're a little bit tougher, and 2, I think the lighter colour just helps gets a fish's attention a little bit faster. So I always find that lighter, rubbery caster is the one to go for. So as I say, feeding is the way to go. We've got our little short rig on. And for me, what I like to do is have some feed in the peg and then just go out initially and just slap the rig 3 or 4 times, then let it fish. Float's obviously really dotted down. We're still going to be obviously striking at bites, but we're hoping that a lot of bites pull that elastic out. Now the trick is to obviously, even with that short line, try and keep the pole tight to that float, because you can, there we go, we've got one. You can, if you're not careful, let your pole relax just that inch or so, and if you let it relax too much, you're not keeping your float, your line tight between your pole tip and your float. Oh, beautiful F1. Now this lake has a real mixture of fish in it, so I think target species are these big beautiful F1s. So we'll just show you this one. But there's a lot of carp in this lake as well, little carp, some big carp. It's a double figure fish in this lake, but there's a real mixture of species. And there we go. See if we'll, it's a bright old day and they don't like the sun, these fish. There we go, he's probably, I don't know, £2, 2.25 pound. Perfect size fish for shallow fishing. As always in these little sessions, we're not bothering with a net. I don't see the point of bothering with a keep net in these pleasure sessions. Once we get into a nice rhythm, hopefully we'll be catching these fish fast. So there we go, that little white rubbery caster again. Try and feed just before we ship out. You might notice that we've got quite a stiff elastic on our catapult, and that's because I just feel that sometimes it helps me group the bait a little bit better, especially on a calmer day. Very different when we're trying to punch bait out in a wind. But on a calmer day, we can sort of, instead of pull a lighter elastic a long way back, we can sort of almost like flick the bait out and it lands in a slightly tighter group. Always want to feed a bit of bait as I'm playing a fish. I want to keep bait going through the water as often as possible. Although we're fishing 10 inches deep, I feel that we probably need to keep bait, a nice trickle of bait in that top 2 foot of water for as long as possible. And as soon as the bait falls below 2 feet, we're not feeding the peg effectively. So there we go, another F1. Not quite as big as the first one, £1.5 pound maybe. Always have a quick check of the rig every time I ship out, just to make sure none of the slot shot have slipped. And when we get into a rhythm, or hopefully we'll get into a rhythm, it's a fantastic way of fishing. I always feel that a bit of ripple on the water surface helps as well. So when you're fishing on those flat, calm days, I know the fish, they probably want to be shallow on those flat, calm days, but the downside is they're just not comfortable enough to come underneath your pole tip. And this ripple that we've got today means that those fish are a lot more confident to come underneath your pole tip. These are beautiful F1s. We've got 3 and 3. I don't know what weight you could have if you really got going. I mean, look at that. Beautiful golden F1, solid as a rock. It's probably £2. Like I say, we're not going at full pelt, but I imagine when you really get in the zone, you can catch a few fish. So every time before I ship out, I'm feeding a little bit of bait. Hopefully there's a few fish milling around that bait now, and then we slap our rig in the middle of it. We centralise those fish around our hook bait, and that's when one will probably make a mistake, hopefully. You can see we're not leaving the rig in the water for very long. We're slapping it every single time we lay it into the water. They love that little plop of that caster on the water surface. It's all about keeping your bait in the same spot as well. So when you feed, or when you slap the rig, sorry, you need to be getting that caster to fall basically in the same area that it plops on the water surface. You see people they slap the rig and then they slide the rig to the side. And that's the opposite of what we're trying to do. Really busy fishing. And what we'll do is we'll try and get into a little routine where we slap the rig and then just give it like a little lift now, slap it in again, almost guessing the bite time. So if we lay it in, slap it, and then lift it at the right time, we'll get a time of when those fish are generally taking that bait, and we can lift into the fish without even looking at the float really. We're just using the float as a bit of a guidance. I think what I'm going to do after this fish is, because as with all fishing, a sharp hook is massive, and I've realised that through my feeder fishing, that the sharper the hook, you know, it's obvious really, but I can't tell you the difference a super sharp hook out of the packet compared to a hook that you've caught a few fish on. I can't tell you the difference that makes between how many fish you catch. And especially on the method that we're fishing today, where we are relying on a few fish to hook themselves, I've just noticed on that last fish that I bumped a fish, and also hooking that caster, it was just a little bit awkward. Seemed to take just a little bit more pressure than normal just to burst the bait, to go through the bait. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to whip this hook length off. I mean, it takes a second. And put another hook length on. I tie my hook lengths to 8 inches in length. I think that's a great length for bigger baits for carp, but also it means that when I'm fishing for F1s, I can literally just double the hook length up. So I double the hook length up in my fingers, lay the loop next to the hook, and with my loop tie I can just simply tie a loop, and I've got a 4-inch hook length now. The massive benefit of that is I don't have to tie up 2 sets of hook lengths, and I can maybe have another beer at night, or maybe play 20 minutes extra football with my lad instead of tying hooks. So we're back in business. We've got a nice sharp hook on now. Same size 16, yeah, you can see that it goes into that caster, totally different in comparison to the last hook. And let's just see if that makes a difference to what we catch. Like I say, I've noticed it so many times when I've been feeder fishing. That sharp hook just catches in the fish's mouth loads better, which is, it's obvious really, isn't it? Schoolboy stuff, but so many of us are lazy when it comes to changing hooks. There we go, cool, that was positive. Probably about 10 or 12 ounce, loads of those fish in here. Be nice if we catch the odd carp in amongst these F1s, but I'm happy catching an F1 every chuck. Off camera, before we started filming, we had, I think, 3 or 4 carp. Nothing big, sort of like 3-4 pound was the biggest, but still really welcome. I always find that the shorter the line you've got between your pole tip and float, the less carp you do catch, but obviously we'd need that short line to make this rig effective for the F1s, so it is a balancing act. Like I say, a few years ago this was my sort of fishing. I was really fortunate that my dad had a small local tackle shop, so I could pop in there after the weekend and any old casters that weren't spoken for, I could grab a few bags full of casters and get out on a few F1 venues. Always find it amazing as well. Carp are a little bit clumsy, but F1s, you can catch them 10 inches deep and you hardly see a sign that the fish are there. It's amazing to think that you've got those fish that are probably acting like piranhas 10 inches below your float, and you never see a boil or a swirl or you can see there that rubbery caster did its job then, because we had 2 or 3 bites. I think a little fish pecking at it as well, and we still managed to fish effectively. Whereas I think with your classic nice crispy golden caster that a lot of people would hook, I don't think you get that chance. I think it smashes really easy when you're slapping it. Got to be a little bit cautious when you ship out as well. Obviously we've got a short rig on, we don't want to tangle it. Make sure your pole roller's set nicely. I'm trying my hardest not to catapult bait past my pole tip, but I understand that probably some bait will go past the pole tip, but I'm trying my hardest to keep it sort of inside my pole, and hopefully the hook bait is the furthest bait away from my position. It's a beautiful way to fish. Like I say, just check those slot shot. See, all these sort of shots do have a tendency to move around, so you've got to be a little bit careful. This is a lovely little rhythm now, isn't it? In and out. Slap the rig on the water surface, feed some bait. A little carp that time. The elastic I've got on these shallower rigs is I think it's a cerise, the colour. It's a cerise reactor core. Slightly lighter than the yellow. I just think with really shallow rigs, the last thing you want is a big splash on the water surface when you're hooking them so shallow. It's a real changeable day today. We've got a bit of cloud. Quite often, like I say, if this was a match situation, we'd have a couple of rigs set up at different depths, because I mean, the fishing's fantastic now, but I think in a match situation it probably wouldn't be quite as good, and we'd have to be making a few more changes, maybe deepening up when that cloud cover came over, or shallowing up a little bit. We're relying a lot on slapping the rig and feeding, but we could end up slapping the pole tip on the water and just doing a little bit of tapping as well. That could be a brilliant way of keeping fish in the area or attracting fish to your hook bait. Little tiny fish. I think he's a little F1 lot. It's great, yeah, sort of like just how you want it. Feed a bit of bait, ship out, slap your rig a couple of times, fish on. I mean, the ideal scenario is we don't even get to use the catapult. It's a case of feeding while our hook bait is out of the water, but if we do need to pick the catapult up while the rig's out there, it's not the end of the world, but it's nice if you can get into that rhythm where we're feeding before we ship out, and then just concentrating on sort of slapping the rig. So we'll try not to pick up the catapult this time. Rely on the slap, concentrate on presenting the rig nice. There we go, we've got him. And obviously because we've got a soft elastic, we can get the top kit back quick. Feed again. Have a bit of bait on my right hand side because I feel I can, although I can throw bait with my left hand, I do feel I can throw it probably an extra metre or so with my right. So I just have a bit of bait on my right hand side, especially when we're fishing, fishing 9 metres out today. I'd say probably with casters, with this sort of wind, 7-8 metres is the limit with my left hand. So again, another handful of casters, probably 30-40 casters. Concentrate on the presentation again. Don't let the wind take the pole anywhere. Oh, perfect. And it's this sort of rhythm that you'd love to get into in the match. And as always, the more times you can feed with your pole off of the water or your rig out of the water, the more confident the fish will be. So while you're actually fishing the swim, it can be quite hard work to get a fish to take your bait. But if you can sort of feed it like we have been doing, so if we can feed it now, and hopefully those fish now are feeding confidently because there's no pole over the heads, there's no rig in the water. And then those fish that are feeding confidently now, we can sort of like trick one into taking the hook bait. A big swell next to my float that time. Hopefully you can notice I'm trying to make the hook bait make the noise rather than the float or the pole tip. See, it becomes awkward. Once you miss that first chance, it does become a little bit awkward. There we go, got him. Feed, I'll feed with a catapult this time. Feels a bigger fish though this time. I'm going to say it's a carp. You can always tell the carp, they sit a bit deeper, a little bit more powerful. Obviously your F1s, they're a little bit scatty when you first hook them, but they sort of behave themselves when you're playing them, whereas a carp, just a little bit heavier, a little bit more power. It's just worth taking your time, making sure they end up in the net. Say that. It's just a nice big F1 after all that. He is a nice fish. Cool. Let's hold him up because he is a nice fish. Beautiful fish, probably £3. Thought he was a carp. I'd have bet money on that being a carp. like I say, always try and make sure that rig's right, because, you know, I used to do a lot of individual coaching, and we still do a few group sessions, and the amount of times that anglers will set up and their rig's absolutely spot on, and then after a couple of fish, all the shot have moved and they've not really noticed, and they're missing bites. And it's all because the rig's not quite right. Just like, obviously we changed that hook earlier. We need to make sure everything is spot on. Just had a fish there rattle the pole tip. Obviously just didn't quite hook himself, so feed again. Tell you what, I could carry on doing this all day, but I think that's enough for you guys. We've had a really nice shallow fishing live session. So real time, showed you the rigs, had a brilliant little session. I mean, not the biggest fish, but probably, I don't know, £4, classic F1 from a commercial. And we've had plenty of them, haven't we? I've lost count how many fish we've had, and lost count of the weight we've had as well. Hopefully you've taken something from that. I've took a lot of enjoyment from the session. I'm going to carry on, but I'm going to turn the cameras off. Hopefully I'll catch a fish or two till the end of the day. Until next time, folks, tight lines.